To summarize, we first looked at tables. And tables have an optional border attribute. The idea is that the border attribute is usually used when you're presenting tabular information. And the border attribute is almost never used when you're using tables just to align and arrange things in the page. The border attribute is also one of the few examples where CSS has not really caught up to HTML-based formatting. It's difficult to use pure CSS to reproduce consistently across browsers the effect of border equals something or another. Caption gives a label to the table that typically goes above the table. It's moderately useful, and assistive technology and page analysis tools will know that it's a label of the table. But nevertheless, it's quite common in real life to omit caption and just put some HTML text above or below or beside the table indicating what the table is about. Other than caption, the main thing that goes inside a table is a bunch of TRs. Don't forget the end tags. And inside the TRs are either THs or TDs. You can mix and match. There's no rule that THs have to go at the beginning, but it's more common to have THs in the first row. These are the headings, and TDs in the subsequent rows. These are the data cells. And unless you use call span or row span, which we discussed, then normally each TR, each row, has the same number of elements. To summarize input forms, the form tag itself is not absolutely necessary and is quite often omitted when you're using JavaScript to talk to the server. But the form tag is absolutely required with an action if you're doing a normal form submission, because without a form, you don't have an action. Without an action, you don't have any server-side program to process the form data. But whether or not you're using JavaScript, you certainly care about the form input elements. The most common category of form input elements are for gathering text. The simplest one is a normal input element. You can say input type equals text, or you can just omit the type. You have password fields, which obscure the data as the user types into it. And you have text areas where you can have multi-line text input. There are various kinds of buttons, but one of the most common types used with JavaScript is input type equals button. And you either explicitly give an onClick attribute, or you attach the onClick attribute later in your JavaScript code. And then there are various ways of collecting one or more choices among a set of fixed options. You have checkboxes, you have radio buttons, and you have select menus. And select menus can be drop down or fixed size, and select menus can also be single choice or multiple choice. All right, so I said in the first of the HTML sections, HTML is easier than JavaScript. Or at least HTML syntax is a lot easier than JavaScript syntax. And that's true. However, it's not immediately obvious how to do things on first blush. So you still, even though it's simpler than JavaScript, you still need to practice. So many of you have already seen HTML. HTML is often learned even in high schools nowadays. And so it's possible that you're quite familiar with HTML already and that this is just a quick refresher course for you and there's just a few things you picked up along the way. But if HTML is pretty new to you, take a break and try some things. In particular, download the source code from the examples of this lecture, play around with them, modify them a little bit, see what happens, and then try some of the exercises to produce a few simple tables, a few simple types of input forms, and so forth.